What's up, guys? Welcome to Truth and Theology Unleashed. My name is Wes Wheeler. Thank you so much for joining me today. Is there anything too hard for the Lord? This is what the Lord spoke to Sarah when she laughed at him after he had spoke to Abraham that he would return and bless Abraham and Sarah with a son named Isaac. We've all, like Sarah, been in a situation where the circumstances appear differently than what the promises were. We've all felt like God has promised us something, but when we look at the circumstances, we think to ourselves, there is absolutely no way that I heard from God or that this is going to happen, whatever the case may be. And every time the Lord proves us wrong, He does far abundantly above than what we can ask or even imagine. And so, what I would like to do is direct you to Genesis chapter 18, verse 14. I'm going to pull this up on the screen here. I wanted to look at this story momentarily, and I think that there are some encouraging details in this story that I think will build our faith up and help us along our journey. We will start with, let's start with verse, we'll start with verse 10. We'll start with verse 9. Let's go with verse 9. They said to him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" And he said, "She is in the tent." Now, Abraham is talking with three men who many Bible scholars believe are angels, one of them being the Lord. And it's revealed later that one of them is the Lord. Actually, if you read the end of the chapter, he has prepared a dinner for them. They're eating, and the Lord's about to tell Abraham that he's going to return a year later and Sarah will have a son named Isaac. Watch what happens. Verse 10, the Lord said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now, Abraham and Sarah were old. How would you like to have that written about you in the scriptures? They were advanced in years. The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I am worn out, and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure?" Verse 13. The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son." And if you read just a couple chapters, that's exactly what happened. The Lord returned, and Sarah had a child, and his name was Isaac. There are many wonderful truths in this story. But what I find is fascinating is how God waits until both Abraham and Sarah are in a position in their life where they cannot achieve this promise on their own. Remember, Abraham had tried previously, and Sarah both. They conspired together that Abraham would have a child through the maidservant of Sarah. And Abraham was a father to Ishmael. But Ishmael wasn't the one that God would uh, bless with the birthright. God was going to go into a different direction. But if you read in verse, I think it is verse 11, It says, now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years, the way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. They were both at a point in their lives where they cannot accomplish pregnancy on their own, right? They were way past the years for this to take place. And it's funny that God chooses to wait this long at this appointed time and then says, about this time next year, you're going to have a son. And you can imagine being Sarah, being advanced in years like that. You too would probably laugh. And she does. She laughs. And she says to herself in verse 12, after I am worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? The Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? Why did she say, shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old? And he says, is there anything too hard for the Lord? Is there anything too hard for the Lord? The scriptures tells us that the same God who made the heavens and the earth in Jeremiah 32:17, he made the heavens and the earth by his great power, and with his outstretched arm, there is nothing too hard for him. If God can make the universe, if he could speak the world into existence, if he can make the universe with an outstretched arm, then surely there is nothing too hard for the Lord. There is nothing in our lives that could stop the Lord from moving. And Job understood this. He says, Lord, surely you will accomplish all your purposes. Nothing can thwart your plan, your purposes. What God determines to do, he will do. God was determined to bless Abraham and Sarah. God was determined to give Abraham and Sarah their own child together named Isaac. And Isaac would be the one through whom the birthright would come to. Isaac would be the one who would enter into a covenant relationship with God, and the one whom the promised seed would come through. Not Ishmael, but Isaac. There's great possibilities with the Lord, friend. Great possibilities. Jesus told his disciples, he said, with men, this is impossible. Speaking of who could be saved, right? Jesus tells his disciples that it's hard for a rich person to enter into heaven. And they say, well, who can be saved then? And Jesus says, with man, it's impossible. With man, it's impossible to accomplish salvation. With man, it's impossible to accomplish a lot of things. We may think that we have the wisdom and the might and the ability to do it on our own, but we end up falling flat on our faces every time. We end up disappointed because we fail to realize that God has a plan. He has a purpose, and he will accomplish those purposes, and nothing will hinder him from doing so. But Jesus says, with man, this is impossible. But with God, all things are possible. So when we're in that situation where things look dark, where things look hopeless, where things don't seem to match what God is saying that he's going to do. If you've ever struggled with infertility, you know how hard that is, how difficult it is to see everyone around you, all your girlfriends and all your family members getting pregnant, but you are unable to. And despite feeling that God has promised you a child, you still have those doubts. Can God really do this? Especially when you look at your circumstance. When you're in that situation, remember that all things are possible with God. There is nothing too hard for him. And the reason for that is because he accomplishes his purposes. Nothing can thwart the plan of God. I've learned that personally in my life. My wife and I, we waited 8 years for our first son. We tried that long to have a child and could not. In fact, she was told that it was very unlikely that she could have a child due to some of her medical conditions. And so after 8 years, we honestly reached a point where we had stopped thinking about it. We had just decided that we were going to spend the rest of our lives with no children, that it was just going to be her and I. Well, we had started to feel like it was our time. We didn't receive some vision or some dream or some prophecy, nothing like that, but we just felt in our spirit that it was time for a change. And we felt like it was coming. And sure enough, after 8 years of trying, my wife finally got pregnant. And I remember the moment that we find out and said to myself, Lord, when you say it's time, nothing can stop you. You will surely do it when it's the right time. And that's what we'll see here. He says, is there anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. You must understand that God has a plan that he has put in place before the world was ever created. And he is working off that plan. He's working off that blueprint. It's kind of like a architecture or an architect who, prior to building some structure, he first draws up the blueprints and he works off that blueprint. God is the same way. Before he created you and I, before he created the universe, he had the blueprints, and that's what he's working off of. And so at the appointed time, God will move. God will bless. God will answer your prayers and you will receive the answer to your prayers. Now, it may not be what you expected because God has a will, He has a plan, and oftentimes our wills are not lined up with His will. And Paul even says that we don't know what to pray for as or how to pray as we should. We don't know how to pray for the right thing. But as time goes on and as we mature through trials and through testing, we come to learn to pray according to God's will, not our own. And so remember that. He says, at the appointed time, I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. And if you read the rest of the story, that's exactly what happened. So, friend, I hope that this video was an encouragement to you. I hope that you understand that there is nothing too hard for God and that He will accomplish His purposes. And at the right time, at the appointed time, you will see God move. God bless you guys. Until next time, thanks for watching.